So let's take a look at the new rules for Warhammer 40k from the balance update being tested on the field of battle. What factions are people choosing to play, which ones have been doing well, and let's take a look at a few of the top placing army lists so far. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought we'd take a look in at Warhammer 40k tournament data, as this one's the first big event weekend since Games Workshop introduced the balance update last week. With that in mind, I thought we'd take a look through last weekend's tournament data. For this one I manually went through best coast pairings to add up some player numbers and calculate some win percentages, and in the video let's take a look at a few things: which armies people are choosing to take to tournaments and which ones are getting left at home, initial win rates for which factions seem to be doing well or badly for the average player, and then which armies actually topping events and going undefeated. I thought I'd focus on the ones that had gone 5 games in a row with 0 losses, see what the general trends are, and then take a look at a good few specific examples of factions that have done consistently well, and in particular focus on any changes they might have made since 40k's last balance pass. Obviously, as ever with 1 week's tournament data, it's not really to be relied on as any sort of great guide on its own. In reality, we need several weeks of data to build up, so this one should be treated more as a first glimpse, more for interest than anything else, and just because one faction's done well or badly this week doesn't mean they won't do the opposite next week. Numbers might be a bit more reliable for the armies that have had quite a lot of people play with them, and less so for those who haven't. Usual caveats aside though, let's jump right into it, and in the first weekend since Games Workshop's balanced data slate, these are some of the factions that have been played the most. They've been used in the most grand tournament games, so taken with a bit of context of the usual player numbers for these factions and how popular they are, you can often see if people are unusually enthusiastic for one faction or another. Seems that the most popular faction is Space Marines. They're often towards the top, but haven't generally tended to be the single most popular faction for a while. It seems that a bit of new content has drawn people back to the Astartes. We've had new rules and characters for them, and in particular the Raven Guard Shadowmark Talon does seem to be doing rather well on the competitive scene. Next up, and in joint second place, are Death Guard and World Eaters. Death Guard remain popular. They've been the single most played faction for quite some time now, and they didn't get any nerfs in the balanced data slate, so they've not really dropped. World Eaters have risen up a good amount though. The change is getting a lot of people more enthusiastic to play them, and as we'll see, they've been doing very well on the tournament tables so far with that huge swell of players, both for the average player and on the top tables. Beyond that, in this half of the data, maybe nothing too unexpected. Most of these are popular factions that typically have a good amount of players. Leagues of Votann seem to have made it into the top half, they're not always there. And again, people have been doing rather well since their codex came out. For the bottom end of the list, play rate wise, there does seem to be at least a fair amount of balance. Almost every faction in the game, bar a few, have had 100 games or more, and notably Admech coming in at 15th place. They're a lot higher than they usually are. New Admech style Oath of Moment with Belisarius Call seems to have attracted a lot more people to put them on the table. Demons seem to have been a little bit lesser played this week. Genestealer cults have dropped right back in the face of plenty of nerfs. They're usually lesser plays, but they have been playing quite a lot more before the recent nerfs they got, and it doesn't initially seem like Orcs or Deathwatch players have jumped back into the faction in a big way after the points buffs they got. They're given a whole bunch of scattergun changes to the Orcs. I wonder if there might be a bit of a delay there. Moving on from popularity to win rates, as we can see most of the factions have at least had 100 games, so that's still not really a lot of data. I generally focus on whether the armies have just been doing broadly well or not in these early weeks. The exact numbers will absolutely change a lot as we get more weeks worth of data. Initially towards the lower end of the meta, it looks like, unsurprisingly, we've got Imperial Agents at the bottom with just the one player choosing to take them. It seems that Dark Angels and Tyranids still seem to be on the lower end of the win rates, and for the small number of players taking Orcs, they didn't seem to have any good improvements this weekend. Hopefully that'll improve with time. Space Marines seem like they've had a slightly better weekend than their average previously, getting 48% wins, and a good amount of that seems to have been driven by a few people doing very well with the Raven Guard Shadowmark Talon. It's maybe not too surprising to see Thousand Suns down here as well. Games Workshop hit them very, very hard with the nerfs. Then I was certainly expecting a lot of factions to be in the middle tier, and given the way that percentage averages work, the usual trend is that more armies will tend to cluster around here as we get more data. But even right off the bat, there's plenty of armies around the sort of 49 to 53% wins. The vast majority of these not really so very different to where they were before. Still seems Blood Angels are maybe nosing towards the top a little bit here. Genestealer Cult are there too, but as we're seeing, there's very few people playing them, so it's even less reliable data than the rest. Votann and Admech seem to be doing fairly average on aggregates, though both of them did pretty well in terms of going undefeated at tournaments. Then finally we've got the armies that are on the upper end of the spectrum for the win rates, and after 1 week of data it looks like it's Aeldari at the top here at around 60%. They might drop a bit from there. Pre-update they were sort of having kind of middling win rates for the average player but just winning loads of tournaments. I still wouldn't be too surprised to see them towards the top though. Otherwise Grey Knights had a particularly good week, though not loads of data for them. And then we have Imperial Knights, World Eaters, Emperor's Children, Black Templars, Death Watch, Adeptus Custodes, and Death Guard. Some will be a bit more random than others. We do have quite a lot of people playing both World Eaters and Death Guard as we saw, so you could maybe be a little bit more sure of those numbers compared with the rest. World Eaters do seem to have risen up a bit. In any case, here's the full list for the first week's win percentages. Definitely more of a first look than anything too reliable to say and if anything's either overpowered or underpowered, but I feel like most of that lines up with expectations pretty well. Aeldari, World Eaters and Death Guard towards the upper end. Tyranids, Thousand Suns and Dark Angels a bit further down. For surprises and maybe surprised to see Sisters quite so low and Grey Knights quite so high. I would expect that both of those will be heading a good deal in the other direction when more data builds up though. In any case, here's that as a graph for the first week worth of data. Before we move on to some event wins and some winning lists, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in BaseLok. They asked to feature in a video to share their Kickstarter for some 3D printed transport bits, the Kickstarter being in preview mode at the moment and it goes live in 7 days time. The idea behind their things is their little gizmos to hold bases onto magnetised sheets. I'm sure plenty of you out there use magnetic transport solutions, and the idea for these is to have an option where you can mount magnets on clamps to hold the bases in place, as opposed to necessarily having to mount them on the underside of bases. The idea is that you'll get the designs and you can 3D print them in FDM at home, and they make some grabby components the right size for each base size, where you can put your model in and then hold it in place with a magnetised arm that's hinged. So the model stays in place in the clamp, and then the clamp's held to the magnetic surface with magnets in it. The main Kickstarter offering is £35 for all the designs, with an early access day one discount. The idea for the advantages of this is that it means that you wouldn't have to mount magnets to the bottoms of bases, which could reduce the amount of magnets and hobby that you might need to do in total. Perhaps putting a tiny bit less strain on the model itself, and might be handy for solid resin bases where you don't have somewhere to mount the magnet on the underside. Could be useful for some people, certainly not a necessity to everyone. I'll talk through a couple of pros and cons at the end of the video. If you wanted to take a look at their stuff though, I'll leave it links down in the video description, and a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. Getting back to 40k army performance though, here's a roundup of the armies that either won tournaments, went undefeated, or in the case of bigger tournaments had first 5 game undefeated runs, both of which could have been the equal of winning a small tournament elsewhere. Generally the spread of factions actually getting some event wins in really wasn't too bad. Seems to have got 15 out of Warhammer 40k's 28 main factions represented, and a good deal of the ones that didn't take these top spots at least had some, say, 4-on-1 results. There's certainly some armies that felt a bit more standout though. It seems that 4 lists either won tournaments or went those first 5 games undefeated with Aeldari, 3 war host lists and 1 aspect host list. It seems the Space Elves have been having a pretty great time both for topping tournaments and for winning games in general. Then for the armies that had 3, there were the World Eaters, Blood Angels and Leagues of Votann. The World Eaters all used Berserker Warband, the Blood Angels 2 used Liberator and 1 used Angelic Inheritors, and the Leagues of Votann all used the Brandfast Oathband, so the transport focused one. Then for 2 lists in this category, we've got Death Guard, Chaos Knights, Necrons, Admech and Raven Guard. Seems that while Chaos Knights weren't standout on the win rates this weekend, they're still capable of putting in a shift on the top tables. Both lists used Infernal Lance here. The Necron lists were Awakened one, the Death Guard Virulent Vectorium. Perhaps the Raven Guard and the Admech are the most interesting changes post-update. Admech weren't reaching the top tables very consistently, but here they have both with Hero Screed and Hunter Cohort, and despite a few Space Marine nerfs, it does indeed seem that the Raven Guard with their lone operatives and boosted Shadowmark Talon Vanguard detachment, that has been enough to see them succeed at the top levels of play. Then for one player doing well, we've got Chaos Demons, Tyranid Subterranean Assault, Chaos Space Marines, Chaos Cult, Drukhari Sky Splinter, an Imperial Knight Noble Lance one where it perhaps looks like the tournament might have used the points but not the rules updates for Imperial Knights, I'm not 100% sure there, and then a Grey Knight Warpbane Task Force. Going through a few of those placings, it does seem that the World Eaters are doing incredibly well right after the changes. I was wondering just how much of an impact they might have had, having nerfs to 3 quite key units, but then some really big drops to 8 bounce. In general though, it seems that the units that got nerfed are all still usable in their own way. Most lists do tend to be going heavier on the 8 bounce, perhaps somewhere around 3 to 5 squads or so. It looks like for the top performing list there's a good amount of 20 strong Khorne Berserkers on the table. This list by Michael Hooper took first at a grand tournament called Ice Hammer, going 5-0 at a 34-player event. This one doesn't really seem so very different from Berserker Warband lists before. They're perhaps swapping out a Karma the Betrayer unit with a Rhino, and instead having a bigger unit of Berserkers and a greater focus on 8 bound. There's a Demon Prince for 3 stratagems nearby and massive melee taking the Berserker glaive. A Juggernaut Lord with Favourite of Khorne. I guess he'd be going with the big 20 strong Khorne Berserker unit and then giving them the speed that they need to get into close combat. They're going to be an absolutely terrifying threat and have got loads of OC to sweep objectives while they're pushing forward, and then you can't shoot them very easily, otherwise they're going to just jump into melee with something miles away. Then there's certainly some heavier use of 8 bound here, 2 small units of 3 of them, every one an enormous melee threat you can't really ignore, and then 2 squads of the exalted ones with their punchy new damage 3 attacks against monsters and vehicles. Then there's some infiltrating goremongers that allow you to do your scout moves in safety, 10 jackals for sticky objectives. Looks like the points increases certainly haven't put them off spawn with 3 units of 2 of them there. Apparently still good for their nuisance trading role even at 90 points, and then 2 forge fiends at their increased points cost, still providing the firepower with the ectoplasma cannons. For another take on the World Eaters, and I believe winning the single biggest tournament this past weekend. This one by Innes Wilson went 7-0 at an event called the Doonhammer Open. It seems that his list puts an absolutely terrifying 50 Khorne Berserkers on the tabletop, 2 enormous squads of 20, each looking like they're led up by a Juggernaut Lord, one with Battle Lust to help them get into combat. Moving 10 inches with the potential to advance and charge is all very nice there. This one still finds room for Khan the Betrayer with a smaller unit of 10 of them in a Rhino. I still think that he's very efficient given that the overall combo cost quite a lot and only went up by 15 points. And then beyond that, looks like there's 2 sets of 3 Exalted 8 bound. Not sure if the plan is to deep strike them or rush them up the board. One squad presumably led by that Slaughter bound with a Berserker Glaive. And then again there's a good amount of objective support with some jackals for sticky objectives, and then 3 units of 2 scouting, fast moving and trading swarm. Overall certainly looks like a very strong start for World Eaters, at least by all the early numbers. Topping both the charts for the win rates and the 5-0 undefeated placings though were the Aeldari. This certainly seems pretty likely given that they were doing quite so well in the previous meta. After the Death Guard on Night nerfs, they'd won far more tournaments than any other faction, and they didn't really get anything disastrous in the balance update. Nerfs to big squads of Swooping Hawks, and a small increase to small squads of Void Reavers, though most of their staples completely untouched. Still seems that even post-nerfs, those exact units can be doing very well though, as it seems Colin Power has managed to show with an event win at a tournament called Dirk Doom 4. It's an Aspect host army list that's absolutely maxed out those Swooping Hawks, 3 big units of 10 of them despite the big 190 point cost. They move really fast and can bring a huge amount of last blaster shots with lethal hits. They'll be buffed by Aspect host rerolls and could potentially combo with the shooting stratagem that they have there with ignores cover and sustained hits, plus potentially Lycus' ability to mark a unit for critical hits on a 5+. You could stack quite a lot of saves that way. They can also put out quite a lot of mortal wounds at close with their grenade packs for enemies that go too close to them. Besides the big Hawk units though, most of the rest is at least fairly standard Aeldari scary stuff. 10 Fire Dragons with Fugan, I guess jumping in and out of that Wave Serpent with stratagems, potentially able to move pretty fast, disembark, hit something very hard and retreat back to safety. They can be very hard to get to grips with the Wave Serpent trying to hide behind terrain. Janezar's rushing up the board with a unit of Howling Banshees, pretty nasty general purpose and very fast moving to destroy some enemy elite infantry. Lycus can jump in from a mile away with near guaranteed charge and a bunch of shooting beforehand with a squad of Warp Spiders with a Power Blade Exarch. And there's another one that can also warp pretty close and then has a shooty loadout with Death Spinner and Spinneret. There's 2 sets of Dark Reapers that can have some good direct fire but can hit things hard out of line of sight with Tempest launchers too. And then some solid objective support, Storm Guardians for sticky objectives, Corsair Void Reavers with Blaster and Power Swords for a trading unit that can do some damage, and 2 squads of very cheap expendable infiltrating rangers. Certainly seems that big units of Swooping Hawks can still be effective even with the tax. I still guess that more lists will tend to pivot away from them though. Otherwise, for a slightly different take, here's a Warhost list run by Alexis Borat to take first at a 30-player grand tournament. There's certainly a very good amount of similarities with the list, the same 3 Phoenix Lords and most of the same sort of units but just in different kind of numbers. Maybe one of the biggest difference is that there's a double set of Fire Dragons, one with Fugan and then one by themselves I guess, jumping in and out of Wave Serpents. So 2 sort of alpha level anti-armor threats there. The Swooping Hawks are just in 5-man squads for this one. Be a bit more of a utility kind of role. There's a few more Warp Spiders, Eldrad Orthrons here. There's just the 1 squad of Rangers here, and there's no Dark Reaper units in this one. There usually seems to have been a good mix between the Warhost and Aspect Warrior ones, usually supporting the same units. The Warhost focusing a bit more on the Aeldari movement shenanigans and improving their battle focus, but can still do some very nasty similar sort of movement power tricks with a Wave Serpent with multiple stratagems. Next up, and one of the bigger changes seems to have been the entry of Raven Guard onto the competitive scene in a big way. I was wondering whether to be quite enough to make them break through to the top, but looks like not 1 but 2 Shadowmark Talons have managed to go undefeated. Kavan Shrike was already a great character and added a lot of strength to an army. And then Ethon Shan seemed like excellent value at 85 points, a fighty fast moving lone operative that has a couple of army buff and debuff style special rules. and then basically add that to a flatly boosted Vanguard task force, where if Aethon Sharn's around, then you can use arguably the best stratagem for 0 CP to return units to reserve, allowing you to spend those command points for something else valuable. Getting Hunter's Instincts is another really quite big deal as well. That allows you to arrive from reserves turn 1, and you're allowed to do it with rapid ingress as well for some reason. It's like the only one that isn't locked to them, and that seems to be used on a jump pack captain here, I guess going with one of those 2 big blocks of Vanguard veterans. The precision is also slightly cheaper, and they gained a 4-back shoot and charge stratagem, which is just generally pretty excellent to have, and certainly not too bad if you're including Centurions as well. This detachment already had quite good synergy with those, and returning to reserves to allow them to get lines of sight turning up on the board edges. For this example for them, John Lennon of The Art of War took first at a tournament called the Crucible Grand Tournament, going 7-0 undefeated at an 126 player event. Obviously Kayvan Shrike and Aethon Sharn are in pride of place, Kayvan Shrike presumably leading the other big squad of Vanguard veterans, making them a hard to deal with and very frightening lone operative squad. There's a combi weapon lieutenant for another lone operative, and like Aethon Sharn, he can also get in the way of enemy stratagems, taking the enhancement that allows you to increase the cost of them nearby. Then there's lots of firepower, a squad of 6 Devastator Centurions and a squad of 3, absolutely fearsome firepower if you can get lines of sight on them, and this detachment's great for doing so as mentioned. Then there's 12 Inceptors, 1 big squad of 6 with Plasma, and 2 sets of 3 with Assault Bolters. They're also excellent here. As with the Centurions, they can use the +1 ballistic skill and extra AP stratagem. Plus Inceptors are going to get extra value out of returning to reserves, as the 6-inch deep strike is the main thing they're valuable for. Then finally, aside from the lone operatives, we've also got some other objective skirmishers, a 5-man squad of intercessors for some sticky objectives on the home field, and then 2 more squads of jump intercessors, rarely ever going to be a bad choice, and also seems solid here. They could be another squad to return to reserves if it didn't make sense to with another squad for some reason. Overall, it is appearing like Raven Guard have just overtaken Ultramarines as the meta way to play Space Marines now. Next up, we've got the Adeptus Mechanicus. Halo Screed and Skitarii Hunter cohort are generally the go-to here. This was the Halo Screed list that did well, taking down one of the other major events of the weekend, the Invasion 40K GT, and 107-player tournaments. Belisarius Core and his army-wide rerolls via Admech-style Oath of Moment takes pride of place, of course, and he's joined by a Tech Priest Manipulus with Sanctified Ordnance. That'll be giving lethal hits and +6 inches to his squad's range. While he'd often be leading some Cataphrone Breachers in Halo Screed, it seems that here he's running with Corpuscari Electro Priests. I guess the idea would be that you could reroll all hits and try and fish for 6s, firing at the target that Core marks, and for each 6 that you get, each one of those Electro Priest attacks would get sustained hits too, and also an auto wound for the lethal hits. That seems like it's going to be a pretty terrifying damage punch on paper. I guess ideally at AP-1 with the Doctriner Imperatives. Seems that they're going to be deployed jumping out of a Scorpius Dune Rider, I suppose. Then beyond that, for damage dealers, there's some heavy firepower, 2 Scorpius Disintegrators with Ferromite cannons, and then 3 of the now twin-linked Ironstrider Ballistari with las cannons. They'll also enjoy core-style rerolls. Then there's some massive amounts of melee, 3 sets of Rust Stalkers using the blades for the devastating wounds. I'd guess they might be staging into melee from the second Dune Rider, maybe one squad getting in after another squad gets out. They can charge very far with Advance and Charge on offer for this one. There's 2 squads of the new and improved Sicarian Infiltrators that get some AP on their Taser Goads. They were auto-include before and certainly still are now. There's a squad of 10 and a squad of 5. To activate everyone's Doctriner Imperatives, there's some squads of Skitarii Rangers. They'll also provide some sticky objectives, and then there's a Skystalker squad for wandering around and doing secondaries. It seems that with the addition of some big punchy rerolls, it might have finally tipped the balance, with Admech players being a bit more excited to put their army on the tabletop once again. They've generally been pretty low play rate in 10th edition. It is interesting to see that combo with the Corpuscari Priests too. Next up for the Necrons, there were a couple of high placing lists for them. They were doing pretty fine before and didn't really get too many changes in the update. The Silent King having a special rule swapped out, though going down in cost, and it still looks pretty solid. In this list by Bill Patterson, he seems in pride of place, going 5-0 undefeated. This one's Awakened Dynasty, so the one that can get characters back up after they're slain, some damage boosts for lead units, and some really quite powerful stratagems, including reactive reanimation. Alongside the Silent King, we've got a big chunky Catan in the Void Dragon with lots of stats on the damage and defense, Illuminor Zeraz and the Hexmark Destroyer, both with their lone operative rules that are going to be very hard to kill and then might get back up. 2 Scorpet Lords leading small squads of Scorpet Destroyers, pretty fantastic damage output between all the buffs combined, one with the Feel No Pain Dermal Bond, and again threatening to rise from the dead, and a Technomancer with the Netherrealm Casket, making a unit of 6 rays even tankier than it would normally be. There's a Canoptek Reanimator that could certainly help a bunch of these tough units recover wounds en masse, very nice with the reactive reanimation style stratagem too. and then a bunch of small unit objective support, a single Locust heavy destroyer with Gauss, a bigger squad of 6 Scarabs, 5 flayed ones for infiltrate, and some Ophidian destroyers burrowing on and off the board. Overall, there's a pretty massive amount of stuff going on here. Several big tanky Necron things that are going to be a struggle for any army to put down, and a whole bunch of characters and interference units that might be more killable but then might just get back up again. Next up, it seems that the Leagues of Votann have had a pretty good weekend, 50% wins and some top placings. Most people have been divided between the Bramfast Oathband and the Needguard Oathband. It looks like all of the highest placing lists were Bramfast ones this time around. That's the transport focus one that gives you sustained hits when you're near vehicles for shooting. Plus there's a bunch of nice supporting stratagems for Hexagon land fortresses and the infantry jumping in and out of them. This one by Guy Grimm that went undefeated at Dirk Doom feels about halfway between Index and Codex Votann lists. There's 3 land fortresses equipped with the fearsome rail cannons as big terrifying centerpiece units for the army, then 3 Sagittars with high las beams, looks like one splitting a squad of Hearthkin warriors for some small unit sticky objectives, and the other 2 are holding Chthonian berserks, delivering some pretty fearsome melee into the enemy. For the core damage, there's 2 enormously threatening units of Brokir Thunderkin with the SP conversion beamers. They're murderous with the sustained hits one from the detachment rule, getting both sustained and lethal hits on 4s very easily. And then one's a Brokir Ironmaster led squad with the cyber implant, and that allows you sustained hits 2 for yet more destruction. I guess the Ironkin Steeljacks with the Vulcanite weapons will be jumping out of the 3rd land fortress for just a massive amount of stack saves and mortal wounds. And then there's just a Hernkin Jaeger unit with knives, screening out the mid-board and bringing all the advantages that infiltrators do. Maybe a little bit unusual not to see them split in half with a Capricus carrier. Mechanized Votann don't seem to have been affected too badly by that one unusually close charge stratagem getting patched. Next up there's Death Guard, the Sons of Mortarion still looking like they're in the running, both from a top event and also win rates perspective so far. They managed to get away with no further changes in the balance update, so again not really too surprising, they're doing rather well. This list by Colin Kearns placed 2nd at Doonhammer Open, going 5 wins, 1 draw and a loss. This one feels like a little bit more of a different take on Death Guard. It's using Virulent Vectorium with the sticky objectives and some nice general purpose support including Disgustingly Resilient, and there's some staples but some things done quite differently. There is a good amount of Demon Engine fire support, a bloat drone with a heavy blight launcher, and then going for 2 Plague Burst crawlers despite the really quite big points rise that they had. Just the 1 unit of Pox Walkers, so not so many infiltrators. 2 big squads of Plague Marines jumping out of Chaos Rhinos, fairly enormous amounts of damage available to them, but deciding to go light on the character support there. In the vast majority of other lists I've seen them well supported by the Virion characters, but it does mean that the overall unit isn't quite as expendable if it gets shot down. Then there's a Lord of Contagion leading 6 Death Shroud Terminators, going just for 1 enormous melee threat rather than multiple, and a Demon Prince armed with the Demon weapon this time, whereas I've seen several other lists going for the Feel No Pain. Pretty cool to see some different takes. I wonder if many other people might be tempted by Plague Marine squads unsupported by the Rhino buffs. For the Chaos Knights, it seems that more people have been playing Infernal Lance versus Lords of Dread since their points increases. This list by Bjorn Eriksson topped a 32-player grand tournament, and it's going absolutely no holds barred on the dual Gatling Despoilers, going for a thoroughly disturbing 3 of them. Just on their base stats, they're a fairly scary prospect. 36 shots at strength 6, AP 2 and damage 2, wipes out medium and heavy infantry rather well, and then in Infernal Lance you can get lethal hits on them, which means they've got very solid damage output against tanks and monsters too. The detachment also has all sorts of other options if you want to flex into more movement or more defense, plus good stratagems including Diabolic Bulwark. It seems that the Despoilers take care of the main damage for the list, then there's 3 Wardog Carnivores to scrap for the front lines. They've got very good melee damage per point, and still fairly stand out even at 150 points. And then compared with a lot of Chaos Knight lists, this one's gone very heavy on the demons. 3 sets of 3 Nurglings, 3 individual beasts of Nurgle, and then 10 Plague Bearers. Compared with most nightly lists, that's going to give a lot more board control and random expendable units to be hoovering up the points, while it still feels like the Knights can absolutely out-damage a whole bunch of armies in a straight firefight. That certainly looks like a very intimidating list to play against. The Blood Angels have also been doing rather well. A few high placings and a good win rate on the first weekend. Their balance changes being the Sanguinary Guard ones for the better weapon skill, but coming at the price of a points increase. This list by Sean Delaney went 5-0 at that Doonhammer Open event. It looks like it has changed the way that the Sanguinary Guard were used. There's 6 of them here still with the blades, but it seems they're being led by a Jump Captain with the Speed of the Primarch Fights First enhancement, as opposed to Dante, who often would have been in pride of place there before. Otherwise, it's a fairly Death Company heavy list, a big squad of 10 of them led by Lamartis, and 2 squads of 5. Feels like those 5-man squads are now fairly similar in terms of damage, defense and cost to the small squads of Sanguinary Guards. There's a squad of assault intercessors with the rage-fueled warrior captain allowing you some big rerolls with his sustained hits 3 once per game. Looks like they're just slogging onto the mid-board objectives in this one. There's 2 ballistas dreadnoughts for some fire support despite the points increases, and then a bunch of skirmish units, 3 sets of jump intercessors, a squad of infiltrators denying deep strikers, some infiltrating scouts, and the lone operative Sanguinor with fights first and his heroic intervention trick. It'll be interesting to see how other lists make use of Sanguinary Guard. Blood Angels look like they're off to a fairly good start though. Finally, Grey Knights also had a very good first week. Not really that many people playing them as a faction, at least compared with the rest, but the people that did had a good weekend with 59% wins, and this was the best placing list with David Ozawa's one at the Crucible Grand Tournament, going 6 wins to 1 loss. This one's Warpbane Task Force, so the Purify-centric one with the zones of control, getting big rerolls when he can stay within them. That's an interesting one using some transport vehicles, including the newly cheaper Land Raider that had the change in the balance update it seems. Warpbane Task Force allows you the big rerolls to hit within your zones of control, so it's quite nice for shooting armies. The Dread Knights will get on pretty well with it, with the Grandmaster ones with Subliminator and Psy Cannon, plus a regular one with Incinerator. There's 3 individual Brotherhood Librarians that can deal some good damage at range with their Vortex of Doom, and are just quite nice cheap expendable units in general. But then it looks like the majority of the Grey Knights infantry are piling themselves into transports. 10 Purifiers with Crow, which I guess might be going with the Land Raider as a point to stage them off and get them charging in the middle of the board. And then 2 other Purifier squads, potentially going with a Razorback. I'd guess it's the last strike squad that will start outside of there and put down sticky objectives on the home field. I guess all of those vehicles can shoot extra hard in this detachment if they stay within the zone of control. The armoured vehicles giving you more of an on-the-board staging post to get things into the fight with, which maybe isn't the worst as a counterpart to the other things teleporting around elsewhere. I would guess that with a fair bit more data, Grey Knights probably won't be sticking around at that sort of crazy high win rate they've had this weekend. Maybe they will rise up a bit from their slightly lacklustre performance that they had prior to the update, but it seems kind of hard to imagine they've had their fortunes changed by quite that much, given the very minimal update for them. In any case though, I'll leave that here for now. Let me know your thoughts on a few of these top placing armies, and your takes on the first win rates and data after the balance pass. I look forward to hearing all your thoughts down in the comments. So far looking like World Eaters, Raven Guard and Admech have been some pretty good winners of the changes. In particular, it's pretty cool to see Raven Guard and Admech seeing like they're a more serious threat to the top tables again. That's about it for this one, though before I go I'll just cycle back to the video sponsor in BaseLok and their 3D printed model storage transport clamps. As mentioned, the idea for their Kickstarter is that you attach the magnets to these and then these hold the miniatures in place so they can be stuck to magnetic storage without having to interfere with the bases of the miniatures themselves. Advantages could be for the bases that can't mount magnets well underneath them, maybe reducing the total amount of magnets that you might need, a bit less strain on the model versus being on a magnetised base, and models not trying to grab onto each other in game with magnets mounted underneath them. I feel like it does have some uses, though probably isn't going to be right for everyone out there. Obviously for the people who don't use magnetic storage it's not very relevant, and for plenty of those who do, I'm sure that putting the magnets under bases would work just fine. I guess the main time sink would be producing the clamps, and that being another layer of hobby effort that you might have to do, presuming you do have access to an FDM printer in the first place. I would also bear in mind it's a Kickstarter as well, maybe a little bit less guaranteed than some things off the shelf, though it seems like this one should be less risky than the vast majority of them, given no physical product to distribute, and some fairly straightforward STL files that are already made apparently. In any case, I feel like there's enough value here that it could be of interest to some of you. Feel free to check them out, links down in the video description. As mentioned, their campaign's going live on the 29th of September. If you sign up for an email alert, then they have a discount on the overall price for their early bird offers. Thanks to them for sponsoring this one. I'll leave that there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming with new ones out just about every day. If you've been enjoying all the videos on the channel, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these coming. Channel patrons do get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.